million self-employed people have had access to money to cover lost earnings. But as the weeks went by, after the schemes were first launched, it quickly became clear they didn't cover everyone. And you and I have talked about this, haven't we? The people who've fallen through the cracks, freelancers, company directors, the newly employed, people who were between jobs, found themselves ineligible often for help and were left with no other avenues of financial support. In their words, they've been left behind. It's estimated that the impact of this has left more than 1 million people across the UK with virtually no income for 3 months. Last week, the Treasury Select Committee unanimously agreed to release a report that called on the government to urgently address gaps in the system and support those who've been struggling throughout the pandemic. I wonder if this is you we're talking about. Did you fall through the cracks for financial support the Chancellor announced? And what's been the effect on you and your family? How have you been getting by? Do email us, vine@bbc.co.uk. Please include your phone number. Text us 88291. Let's speak first to Anthony Brown, Conservative MP for South Cambridgeshire, a member of the Treasury Select Committee. I suppose people were always going to be missed out in some way, but it seems like an awful lot have been.
Well, actually, I think the government, by and large, has done an incredibly good job with the whole support package. In fact, we had a debate in Parliament yesterday about it. We had, in fact, many e-petitions, people, over 100,000 people signing in. We had a 2-hour debate, and one thing that was notable was that Labour, SNP, Liberal Democrat and Conservatives, we all supported the government support package. I mean, over £100 billion. But
yes, but
as you say,
that's fine if people benefited, but some people got nothing.
Well, I was just about to come to that. Clearly, there are people who fell between the gaps, but actually there are, with the government launching these incredible programmes where basically they did years of work in weeks, there's a trade-off between speed and complexity, and the more complex you make the programmes, the longer it would take to roll them out. And what was really urgent at the beginning was getting as much money out as quickly as possible, and you only do that by having very simple schemes with simple cut-offs, etc. And in fact, we did do, as a Treasury Select Committee, we did do a hearing with Rishi Sunak at the beginning of this whole process, and he said that's the trade-off.
Yeah, but I'm sorry to interrupt, but why once it becomes clear that there are groups of people who do not get any money, you've got to act. And he didn't act. That's the point. So somebody who relies on their previous employer to underwrite furlough and finds their employer doesn't want to do it, what do they do?
Well, there's no one who ends up with absolutely no support, because everybody has the ultimate sort of fallback position of universal credit and welfare. It's whether people have support above and beyond that. And there are many different government programmes, and most people will get access to one form or another. I mean, you were just talking about furloughing scheme. People who are self-employed can defer VAT payments. A lot of businesses will have, in the hospitality and retail sector, will have their business rates cancelled for a year, and there's a whole range of different programmes that people can take advantage of. And the constituents that are being dealing within this, there may be one scheme they can't get advantage of, but they can then get advantage of a different type of scheme. But there are clearly people. I mean, one of the gaps that we identified in the Treasury Select Committee was people who are self-employed, who became self-employed in the last year, and that's clearly an issue. If somebody started working themselves in January, say, they then find out that the trouble the Treasury has and the government has is that there is no record of what their income was. So if you've been self-employed and you file tax returns, which you do once a year in January, then you know what their income is. And the government said, right, we'll average your income over the last 3 years and pay 80% of that. And that's a fair way, and everyone supports that. But if you're newly self-employed, how do you know what their income is over the last 3 months? And the risk here is that you get a lot of people just sort of making up numbers and fraudsters moving in, seeing an easy way to try and make money out of the government. And the same is true with the dividends issue, and we have pushed government on the dividends issue. The government doesn't know whether people are paying, company directors are paying themselves dividends in lieu of salary, or whether they're dividends earned from investment. There's no way of knowing that unless you spend a huge amount of time tracing the financial flows of individual people's accounts, and you can't do that in an emergency situation like this.
OK, well, thank you very much, Anthony Brown, the Conservative MP for South Cambridgeshire, member of the Treasury Select Committee. He's been through all of these different categories of people who've fallen through the cracks. Let's just remind ourselves of what the Chancellor said in mid-March when all of this kicked off, when it became clear that the coronavirus was a real and present threat to people's jobs.
This is not a time for ideology and orthodoxy. This is a time to be bold, a time for courage. I want to reassure every British citizen this government will give you all the tools you need to get through this. We will support jobs, we will support incomes, we will support businesses, and we will help you protect your loved ones. We will do whatever it takes.
But a lot of people say they didn't do what it needed for them. Rachel Flower is from ExcludedUK. Rachel, your group aims to support people, the exact people we're describing, is that right?
Hi, Jeremy. Yes, indeed. We're a not-for-profit organisation. We've set ourselves up to support these people. Thank you for bringing me onto the show. I'm absolutely infuriated to have Anthony putting out the message that the government consistently says is that there is a broad range of measures and they are there to help people. And he actually said that nobody has received nothing. That is factually incorrect. We have thousands of people who have had zero support. Our survey of our members shows that 61% of people actually can't access universal credit. The service is just not fit for purpose for this situation.
I wondered, because he said the fallback in the last instance for everyone is going to be welfare. But that hasn't worked, is that right?
No, that's absolutely right. We've got plenty of examples of people who have received zero. If your partner works, you don't get universal credit. If you've got savings, you don't get universal credit. We've got people in our group that were saving up for their weddings or to buy a car, and they're automatically excluded because they've got a little bit of money in the bank. The key issue here is equality for UK taxpayers. And the key issue is that people feel lied to, exactly as you just said in that clip from the Chancellor. Nobody will be forgotten. People have been forgotten. The Treasury have identified they've been forgotten. They've fallen through the gaps. They need urgent help. What upsets me most is that we now have an impending mental health crisis amongst these people. Within our group, we've had to talk people back from the ledge, literally. It's irresponsible for somebody like Anthony to be coming and continuing to put out that measure. Yes, there was a debate yesterday in Parliament. Nobody was really talking about how the government are going to take action and when it's going to happen. It's urgent.
Is it just, he mentioned a couple of the categories. I know about maybe a dozen different categories where people are not getting help, and one of them is the newly self-employed. And the point Anthony made there is that you don't have essentially any history of payments as a self-employed person, so the government's got nothing to base it on. What's the reply there?
That's because the scheme requires the 2018 tax return. Of course, these people who have set up in the last year have got their 2019 and 20 tax return, but the HMRC are not allowed to take that. Many of them have also been paying taxes through the system for 10, 20, 30 years before taking the very brave decision to go self-employed. They have all of those records. They could, at the very least, make a payment to those people based on what they contributed through the PAY system in their previous job. To leave them with absolutely nothing when they've been brave enough to set up in business is disgusting. And this government is supposed to support small business.
Right. The other category was people who were moving from one job to another. And I've heard from a lot of these people on Twitter, because they are supposed to go back to their previous employer and said, would you mind triggering the paperwork for my furlough? What has been happening to them?
Well, there's no legal obligation anyway to force that employer to take them back, just like there isn't any legal requirement for any employer to furlough anybody. That's not the way the scheme's set up. So we've got people that were moving between jobs. They just happened to be doing it within that 3-4 month period. So, you know, to what is the logic of excluding them? And then the people that were denied furlough, and some of them also, I must stress, they might be working in care homes, they might be working for NHS trusts. We've got public sector workers in education. You know, these are hard-working people. And there's nowhere for them to go. There's no recourse.
Another category is this is a really weird category that's just arisen in sort of tax law, which is the so-called PAYE freelancer. Now, these are people who would have been freelancers back in the day, but now the people that they work for on a regular basis have to pay them with the tax taken out. Why have they fallen through the cracks?
Well, it's a great question, because actually what we hear from these people is that it was HMRC in the first place that asked them to structure themselves in a certain way. We had a lot of good coverage in the press about the disparity for these particular group of people. Many of them as well work within creative industries, which have got absolutely no chance of getting back to work. So the other really distressing message we're getting now as we're getting brushed aside by the government is everybody gets back to work. Let's look forward. People can't move forward from ground zero. And, you know, I really want to stress as well that debt that is not the answer. Every time the government lists the measures that's available, they also mention bounce back loans, deferral of VAT, or, people are putting money on credit cards and loans. How is it fair for a proportion of people in society to now be sitting with debt around their neck whilst other people have been supported? How are they meant to move forward?
The situation around companies is difficult because there are so many different types of company. But essentially, it seems as if somebody's quite a small business, but they're set up as a company and they are a director, they're immediately going to be missing. Is that right, from the benefits?
Well, the issue is that, particularly if you're a sole director of a company, you can access the job retention scheme only for the PAYE element of your salary, not for any dividends. And if you do so, you can no longer run your company. You have to basically sit on your hands. And when we talk about small businesses, people think about, fat cat company directors with reserves in the bank. Most of these small businesses, they're sole directors, they're hairdressers, they're construction workers, they're people that were basically advised by their accountants to incorporate. Some of them had to incorporate in order to trade with the type of businesses that they wanted to sell products or services to. So, it's disingenuous for the Chancellor and the Treasury to be saying, there might be fraud and they might be getting income from, different portfolios of shareholdings. These are just normal, everyday people.
And is it your concern now that because we're pulling clear of this thing, in brackets, hopefully, they won't have any rear view mirrors on it? They're never going to go back to that 3 months and say, we missed you out, we're sorry, here's some money.
Well, sadly, Jeremy, unfortunately, a lot of our businesses have already had to liquidate. They've already had to close down. The irony is some of them furloughed their staff, but were unable to furlough themselves and get income support. So there's no jobs for their people to come back to. The bigger problem is if we want to bounce back as an economy, those small businesses have to be supported and they've got nothing. And, this idea that we can move forward when we've been treated so badly and excluded, I feel like I always bang on about the mental health issue, but this has been traumatic, the pandemic. And, this message that we will stand together shoulder to shoulder, it's actually been divisive in society, and our people feel, within this community really let down, really heard. If only the government would just speak to us about it. And as I say, to have somebody representing the Treasury and then continuing to put out this message that people have had help in some form or another, that's not true. We've got people who have been in the queue for bounce back loans for 8, 9, 10 weeks, and we've had people who've been declined because they're doing credit scoring at the banks. None of this is acceptable. And the net effect is families, households, people who can't put food on the table and they can't even keep a roof over their heads. People have got debt collectors at the door and no urgent action is being taken. Okay. We're so grateful for you to share this message because it's just infuriating in Parliament in particular that the ministers keep standing up and saying we have an unprecedented package of measures. It does not help everybody.
Thank you very much indeed. Rachel Flower from ExcludedUK, a group aiming to support people who've fallen outside the government's pandemic support schemes. And you heard there from Rachel a number of examples. You may be in one of those categories where, although Rishi Sunak said we're going to help everyone, you looked at the list and you suddenly realised it's not going to be me.
We're in the